Mercedes just delivered the most dominant performance of the 2026 season. And it happened in the very first race. At the Australian Grand Prix, George Russell took pole position. Then on Sunday, he controlled the race from the front. Right behind him, Kimi Antonelli secured second place. A perfect Mercedes 1-2 finish to start the new Formula One era. But only hours after the celebration ended, something unexpected happened behind the scenes. Multiple teams began analyzing the race data from Melbourne. And what they claim to have discovered may have triggered a deeper investigation from the governing body. Because according to engineers inside the paddock, the Mercedes power unit may be delivering electrical energy far more efficiently than anyone expected. Some analysts even believe the advantage could be worth close to 30 horsepower during key acceleration phases. In modern Formula One, that kind of gain can completely change the competitive order of the entire grid. Which is why rival teams are now asking the governing body to take a much closer look at how the Mercedes system works. And if the investigation confirms what some engineers are starting to suspect, the dominant victory we saw in Australia might not just be remembered as the first win of the season. It could become the moment when the biggest technical controversy of 2026 began. So the real question is no longer who won the Australian Grand Prix. The real question is this: did Mercedes simply build the best car for the new era? Or did rival teams just uncover something hidden inside the regulations that could change the entire championship fight? Because once you see the detail that triggered this investigation, the Mercedes victory in Australia may start to look very different. The first race of the 2026 Formula One season was supposed to give us a simple answer. Which team understood the new regulations better than everyone else? But after what happened in Australia, that question has suddenly become much bigger. Because the performance Mercedes showed in Melbourne did not just look competitive. It looked dominant. From the very first practice session, the W17 immediately caught the attention of every engineer in the paddock. The car looked balanced through corners, stable under braking, and most importantly, extremely strong when accelerating out of slow turns. George Russell set the tone during the weekend almost immediately. By the final practice session, he had already delivered a lap more than 0.6 faster than the closest Ferrari. In modern Formula One, that gap is enormous. Especially at the beginning of a completely new regulation era. Normally, the first race of a new cycle is chaotic. Teams are still learning. Engineers are still adjusting their setups. Drivers are still discovering how the new cars behave under pressure. But Mercedes looked unusually prepared. And that feeling only grew stronger during qualifying. George Russell delivered a stunning lap to secure pole position for the Australian Grand Prix. The lap was not just quick. It was convincing. The Mercedes looked planted through the fast sections of Albert Park, and incredibly efficient when exiting slow corners. Right behind Russell on the grid was his teammate Kimi Antonelli. The young Italian produced an impressive performance of his own, securing second place and locking out the entire front row for Mercedes. At that moment, engineers in rival garages began asking the same question. How had Mercedes unlocked so much performance so early in the new era? Because this was not just a small advantage. This looked like a complete package working perfectly. Aerodynamics, energy deployment, mechanical grip. Everything seemed to be working together. But the real test always comes on Sunday. Race pace reveals the truth behind qualifying performance. And when the lights went out for the Australian Grand Prix, the race immediately delivered drama. Ironically, Mercedes did not start perfectly. Both Russell and Antonelli struggled when the lights went out. Charles Leclerc reacted quickly and managed to take the lead into the first corner for Ferrari. For several laps, the battle between Ferrari and Mercedes became one of the most exciting moments of the race. The new hybrid systems introduced for 2026 created a completely different dynamic in overtaking. Drivers now had to carefully manage how and when they deployed electrical energy. Every time Russell activated the attack mode of the power unit, the Mercedes surged forward with impressive acceleration. But that extra power also drained the battery faster, allowing Leclerc to fight back when the energy level dropped. It was a strategic chess match at extreme speed. For a moment, it even looked like Ferrari might have the pace to challenge for victory. But then the race changed. A virtual safety car appeared after another car stopped on track. Mercedes reacted instantly. Both Russell and Antonelli entered the pits at exactly the right moment. It was a perfectly executed double pit stop that allowed them to switch to fresh tires while losing almost no time relative to the rest of the field. Ferrari made a different decision. They stayed out on track, hoping for another neutralization later in the race. But that moment never arrived when they needed it. And when Ferrari finally made their stop, Mercedes had already taken control of the race. From that point forward, George Russell drove like a driver who knew he had the fastest car on the grid. He controlled the pace. He managed the tires. And he maintained a stable gap to the cars behind him. Lap after lap, the Mercedes looked calm and efficient at the front of the field. When the checkered flag finally appeared, Russell crossed the finish line in first place. Antonelli followed him home in second. A dominant 1-2 finish for Mercedes in the very first race of the 2026 season. For the team, it looked like the perfect start to a championship campaign. But inside several rival garages, the reaction after the race was very different. Because while Mercedes was celebrating victory, engineers from other teams had already started examining something extremely specific in the race data. Not the strategy. Not the tire management. The energy deployment of the Mercedes power unit. And what they began to see in that data is exactly what triggered the next phase of this story. Because the numbers from Melbourne suggested something that several teams did not expect. The Mercedes engine might be operating with a level of efficiency that the rest of the grid simply does not have yet. And if that suspicion turns out to be correct, the dominant performance we saw in Australia may only be the beginning of a much bigger battle happening behind the scenes. But the real tension did not begin during the race. It began after the checkered flag. Because once the Australian Grand Prix ended, engineers across the paddock finally had access to the complete performance data from the weekend. Speed traps, energy deployment traces, acceleration curves. Every small detail that reveals how a Formula One car actually produces its lap time. And when several rival teams began studying those numbers, one particular pattern started to stand out. The Mercedes power unit appeared extremely efficient when deploying electrical energy, especially in the short acceleration bursts that define modern Formula One. Under the 2026 regulations, this part of the power unit has become absolutely critical. The new rules reduced the proportion of power coming from the internal combustion engine. At the same time, they increased the importance of electrical deployment. Which means every team on the grid has spent years trying to solve the same engineering puzzle. How do you deliver electrical energy in the most efficient way possible? How do you release power without draining the battery too quickly? And how do you recover that energy fast enough to repeat the process lap after lap? Get that balance wrong, and the car becomes vulnerable on the straights. Get it right, and suddenly your driver has a powerful advantage every time they exit a corner. And according to several engineers inside the paddock, the Mercedes system appears to be doing exactly that. When rival teams compared their simulations with the real race data from Melbourne, they noticed something unusual. The Mercedes seemed able to deploy strong bursts of electrical power without suffering the same energy drop that other teams experienced. In simple terms, the car appeared to accelerate harder, while still maintaining enough battery energy for the next straight. That level of efficiency is extremely difficult to achieve. And it immediately triggered speculation inside several rival garages. Because if Mercedes has found a way to manage electrical deployment more efficiently than everyone else, the performance advantage could be enormous.